Okay. Good evening. Good evening. Welcome on this wonderful June 15th, 2021 evening to Cannabis Equity Minutes with Cynthia Mompoint. And this evening we do have our regular guest now, Moore Stringer, joining us.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Supportive guest.
Thank you. Well, as always, this evening we're going to talk about data in the cannabis industry, the information, we look at it through the lens of equity and what are some of the actions, whether the actions just be policy decisions, conversations, the impact that they have on moving the needle for equitable participation. We focus a lot in Massachusetts, particularly because that's where we currently are, but also because Massachusetts has legislated and mandated in their statute that they want to see equitable participation. So I think this provides an excellent ground to look at what does that look like, what are the outcomes when you do mandate equity, and then compare that to some of the things that we see on the national front where we see the conversation going. I will say, since we've started our conversation on equity minutes, the cannabis equity minutes, and even going back further over the last year or so, the conversation when it comes to those harmed the most by the war on drugs has slightly shifted. And I would probably attribute that to the fact that the industry has opened up. We are in, I think there are 17 states, well, actually more than half, probably about 35 states have some form of legal cannabis access for their residents, whether it's a medical program or a full-fledged adult use and medical program. And when you look at it in terms of the population of our country, that means more than half of the people in our country have access to some form of cannabis. And so the push and the leverage that was used with those lifting the banner of the war on drugs, you don't see that same fervency, you don't see that same commitment. There have been increased conversations, particularly in markets that have already opened up around this issue of what they're calling social equity. Again, it enters into the conversation under the guise of wanting to support those who have been harmed the most by the war on drugs, but then it ends up translating in terms of outcome, continuing to benefit the majority population in this industry, meaning this is an industry that has the legal industry is dominated by white male owners. And when you look at, despite the social equity programs, when you look at who's benefiting from the social equity programs and benefiting to the extent of being able to open and operating a business, we're not seeing the participation of Black and brown business owners. We're just not seeing it. Even we've talked about it in other states where the market is not as highly regulated as it is in Massachusetts. The numbers, the percentage in terms of participation is teetering around 2%. But that,
if I may interject, I don't think people are really measuring the equity in its totality, because remember, we had all these MSOs who got equity status. So if we are looking at everybody who got equity, why do they never include these MSOs who got equity? If they got equity, they should be proud of the equity they got, right? They came in through equity status, meaning they got equity priority status. Hundreds of MSOs.
Well, to do that would be then to acknowledge the fact that they got equity status. And so
I never see that in the equity report, all these individuals, in the spirit of transparency,
Right. And so the reason why you're not going to see it in the reports is because they weren't supposed to have that status. And you're talking about something that's explicit to Massachusetts. There hasn't been any accountability. So this evening, the theme for this evening, before I don't know why I felt moved to give such a background. Perhaps whoever's watching this episode, this is to give you some context as to what we're doing with our show here. But this evening, our conversation really is going to center around accountability. So your question, I guess, is very fitting. And why accountability is necessary if we want to see equitable participation. So as long as we don't see accountable measures put in place, we're not going to see the movement. And when I say the movement, I mean we're not going to see Black and brown participants in the legal space the way we saw them in the legacy space. And how did we see Black and brown participants in the legacy space? We saw it through the arrests. We saw it through the conviction. We saw it through the war on drugs that led to the attack and the decimation of Black and brown families. And this is something that's been going on not just for the last 10, 20 years. We're talking about decades upon decades, upwards of 50 years where this was sanctioned by our government. And so now, fast forward to what we now call as the emerging legal in cannabis industry, we don't see the same commitment to involving Black and brown people in Massachusetts. So the point that you were bringing up, when we talk about the word equity in this industry, the assumption is made that the conversation is to reach those who have been harmed by the war on drugs. However, the action and the policy practice encompasses more than that, than those who have been harmed by the war on drugs. It encompasses other marginalized groups or groups who are marginalized in other areas. So white women who, when you look at the workforce, gender equity, they are marginalized. So they are included in this conversation around equity. It's not just explicit to those who have been harmed through legacy, right? Through being arrested for their participation with the plant. And the point that you are bringing up, which we do not have any accountability for whatsoever, was Massachusetts legalized in 2016. In 2016, we had several medical dispensaries that were operating. In 2018 is when licenses began to be issued. And there were only a handful of licensees, meaning those who were operating, who should have received what they called a priority status, but it was a status that was, they put them alongside the equity applicants. So both the equity applicants, who at the time had a specific name of economic empowerment certificate holders, and the existing operators, they all had a priority benefit that only that the economic empowerment certificate holders did not get to exercise, one. And secondly, the regulatory body took that benefit and gave that status to operators who are well capitalized, multi-state operators who are well capitalized and willing to pay for a medical license, with the end goal of actually just pursuing an adult license in this space.
Well, what happened was so criminal was because the public understood equity to be one thing. The legislation wrote and understood equity to be one thing. But the Cannabis Control Commission,
the regulating body, whose responsibility was to draft policies that would enact and put into effect what the public had voted upon and the legislative body had drafted. But instead,
they interpreted it as something totally different. They interpreted equity should be for these individuals. And if that was their interpretation, that's cool. But one, how come they never brought it to the public? How come, how come this was never mentioned? The beginning of it and the start of it and the end of it, you understand, was never mentioned. To me, for the Cannabis Control Commission to act like they have moral high ground in any capacity when they try to do these investigations against these companies, it's a joke to me. Because the real criminality, you're talking about hundreds of licenses that were against the legislation, was clear and explicitly against that move that the Cannabis Control Commission made. So if they were going to make this move to have this priority period for these individuals who were foreign to the legislation, meaning they weren't Massachusetts residents like the legislation stated. The legislation stated that the cannabis revenue was for Massachusetts residents. So they wasn't Massachusetts residents. If they wanted to get into Massachusetts, they should have been able to partner with equity folks. But Massachusetts had a whole nother game plan for that. And then instead of these MSOs being able to partner with equity folks, the rhetoric was pushed publicly. Now our names were public. They pushed the rhetoric that these equity people are going to flood our market with MSOs. This is what the rhetoric in the Boston Globe was pushed. This is what was said about us. So then everybody starts looking at us, looking at our business deals, speculating, lying on me and my wife about business deals we didn't have. But the whole time that they looking at us behind our backs, hundreds of MSOs got licenses. The social justice chair says nothing. Nobody says nothing. Sean Collins dreams up this thing that creates this pipeline for all of these individuals. And who do you see? You see Chris Crane at the helm of it with SSDP. You see Joey Gilmore, SSDP, Shailene Title, SSDP. So you're talking about corporate espionage. You're talking about these activists who were trained to infiltrate government to effectuate the bottom line of a corporation, and nobody is saying anything. And these folks have the nerve to run around and run their mouth. And all these people who say they standing for equity have the nerve to feel good about these people co-signing their posts. Every time you're talking about equity or something like that, you calling Shailene and not my wife, this Black woman.
Well, interestingly that you brought that up. I didn't know that was the direction, but I think it actually ties into something that
I can't ever get over that.
Well, yes, you know,
I'm gonna keep saying the same thing over and over again until I get my day in court. Because you know what?
Until there's a level of accountability, until someone's held accountable for what happened. I think that's the point, right? Because we identified it and we said, you know what, the ball's already rolling. These operators are not only are these multi-state operators in our industry, but they've already opened up and they're operating. However, there is an avenue in place that, and you said Sean Collins, for those who don't know, that's the executive director for the Cannabis Control Commission. There are avenues in place where all of the people involved could have been held accountable for their role and their responsibility in terms of denying the Massachusetts equity participants from entering into this industry and getting that priority status that they should have had. And instead of doing that, we saw the Cannabis Control Commission buckle down in terms of their stance against equity. And what do I mean? Well, the first thing that they did was when one of the commissioners, who she left on her own accord, but she highlighted the fact that, you know what, these multi-state operators are coming in and they are exercising a priority and privilege that it's not in the legislation that they should have. And she brought it up in a meeting where the other commissioners did not say much. We've talked about this in the past. This is a October 2019 meeting, a public meeting that's available for anyone to see. And in that meeting, and this is going back to the phrase of, instead of the commission addressing the wrongs against the equity folks, they just doubled down on their stance. The director said, well, we'll reach out to, excuse me, let me make it clear. At the time, that was Commissioner Doyle that brought it up. Commissioner McBride, again, both commissioners no longer there now. McBride asked that, well, can we inform those who have been negatively impacted by the decisions that we have made, that this has happened and this is what the commission's going to do moving forward? And Executive Collins said absolutely they would do so. And fast forward 3 years, it has passed, 2019, 2020. So the end of 2019, no communication to economic empowerment certificate holders who were negatively impacted by that decision, by the actions of the commission. So this is the first demonstration of the commission to double down against. Actually, that's not the first.
They were never supportive.
They were never supportive. So from the start, the fact that they denied economic empowerment certificate holders any technical assistance, that was one demonstration of the commission.
They wouldn't even communicate with us. They had a message board. They never put any information on it. We spoke to vendors directly that said that they petitioned the commission to help equity people, and the commission ignored them, denied them, told them equity people don't need no help. And then, after all of this, my wife wrote the Massachusetts Marijuana Social Equity Report, pointing this out. And then for the social equity cohort, They started doing all these things, but what did they do? They act like equity never existed. Economic empowerment never existed.
Well, to that point, they never addressed that. And the other piece was the commission had the option to review applications on a one-to-one basis, and they had the option to determine what that meant. And again, this was another example of how they denied equity, right? Instead of saying, well, we will not approve another, we will not open this industry. We are regulating this. We want to see equitable participation. We will not issue another license until an equity license comes before us.
We saw that in Oakland. We saw that in Oakland.
Well, exactly. In order for them to get a permit to license, the operator,
they had to bring somebody,
they had to support an equity person
in
the city of Oakland.
And it ain't perfect, but there were some things that we pulled that we were allowed to see.
Lessons learned. And that's what happens, right? If someone is doing something already, you have an opportunity to look at what are some of the potential missteps and opportunities to make your program better.
We didn't just look at Oakland's program from the outside looking in. We actually spoke to people in Oakland. So everybody who's putting these reports out about Oakland and everybody else, they copying us. There was no reports out about this stuff. And who did you speak to? Don't just try to list people on your thing to fatten your coffers of people of programs you looked at. Speak to people on the ground, see what worked, see why it didn't work. You understand me? And then say you did your homework on them. It's best to just put 5 on there that you actually did some real investigation on than to put 30 on there and you didn't talk to anybody. And
I think some context is there are reports out of highlighting different programs that folks.
What's said is understood. What's understood is said. What's said is understood. If you don't understand it, it wasn't for you. But you know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about with these reports.
The point that I think
I don't really. We don't got to do all of that.
I want to highlight with that is oftentimes what is made readily available, perhaps through the news outlets. I mean, we experience this here in Massachusetts. Is one messaging, but when you get to speak to the people that are on the ground in these communities and get a sense from those who are either in the industry or looking to get into the industry, you start to you're able to paint a more clear picture than what some may try to put forth. And so this is the case with Oakland. We have spoken
when people fail these programs, which a lot of them are failing. They become these experts because they failed. So they got to feel what didn't work. So they're closer to getting a solid equity program. So you speak to all these failed programs and you put them together. That's what we did to develop the PIES program. We looked at these programs. We looked at incubators. We looked at accelerators. We looked at, seed programs. We looked at these different things. And then we wanted it to be one, easy for the industry. So we wanted it to be able to just flow with the businesses already structured. And then also we wanted it to be a win-win. So we wanted the businesses to be able to get back what they put into that business that they invested in. But we were able to, I was really impressed to me the most with the Oakland program.
And to that point, Oakland has since they've launched their program, which has been several years, they've revamped it several times. And as, for example, the state of California put out, I think, upwards of $30 million towards their social equity programming that the different cities could tap into, and Oakland was able to tap into about $6.5 million of that. Oakland has, in addition to providing technical assistance to their equity applicants, they have their zero loan interest programming that the equity participants can tap into. There were some issues with that, and I think they've since revamped that. They've also created workspace so that people can have rent-free shared workspace opportunities. So there is a lot that anyone looking to the efforts of social equity, around social equity, they can glean from Oakland and then determine how can they make their program better. How can they fill in the opportunities. Where were the weaknesses in Oakland? Because there are weaknesses in Oakland's program, and that's not the purpose of our conversation this evening. But in terms of when we look at what is being put forth in Massachusetts from accountability standpoint, if there is no measure of accountability, and that measure of accountability comes in the form of what is the expected outcome, how are they capturing the data to support that, and then what money is tied to that, and what is the course of action or course of corrective action, if you will, if the outcome isn't met, and even worse, if the policy, practice, or the implementation is not effectuated appropriately.
And that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing that the layman's public doesn't get, myself included. You know, we just think if they say something, put something in a bill, then that's just what it's going to be. But if there's no or if you do this, or if, or you know what I'm saying, or else you do this, or else, you know, if you don't do this, you know.
So going back to right, and
if that doesn't exist,
let me give an example.
It's just going to be swept under the rug.
I'll give an example to a concrete example for what you're saying. When I say accountability, and you bring up this example, you highlight the fact that I'm saying there needs to be an or if or else, essentially a consequence for not meeting that goal. And the consequence doesn't necessarily mean punitive, but some form of impetus or some form of motivation to encourage those in power to do what they're supposed to do. When Massachusetts, the legislators rolled out the actual statutes around what legalization was going to look like in July of 2017, there was a measure around, and and probably this comes from the medical operators having their lobbyists and having their voice heard at the Capitol and amongst the decision makers. But there was a measure in there that said, if the regulatory body did not do their job, which was to implement regulations in a timely fashion and have in place a licensing structure by a certain date, and I want to say the deadline was something like June of 2018. If the commission did not meet that requirement and have something in place for these medical operators to enter into the adult use market, then these operators would automatically, this was the or else. Regulators, do your job, or else these medical operators are going to automatically have an adult use license. And so what did that mean? If the regulators wanted to have any say as to who in the from the medical community was receiving licenses to operate in the industry, then they had to do their job. They had to place an urgency and a premium on rolling out policies and regulations around what are the steps for a medical operator. At the time, we called them RMDs, a registered medical dispensary. What are the steps that an RMD had to take so that they can be regulated, they can be reviewed, etc., and then secure a license for adult use operation? There was no or else or if clause or motivating clause that mandated that the CCC regulate for equitable participation. There was, and there still is, there is still no consequence for the Cannabis Control Commission not doing their job in terms of prioritizing economic empowerment certificate holders. Because can you imagine if in that bill there was language that said, and for the EEs who are identified during that window period, they had a time stamp for that. They had a time stamp limiting how many people can receive that equity status. There was a time stamp for that, but there was no time stamp to guarantee that X percentage of licensed EEs were able to secure a license. And if not, what was going to be the recourse? What was going to be the course of action?
And they cut individuals off at the millisecond.
Yeah, absolutely. in terms of being able
And
to
they had
secure
no
that
problem
license.
showing who was seconds late and minutes late.
What the legislation does say though is if when they look at the data there isn't enough participation from equity program participants, then the commission can include DBEs, meaning businesses, white-owned women businesses, or veteran-owned businesses. They can include that data in their equity data. And so what we see now at the commission, we see DBEs do get expedited review status. We see DBEs do have their own category. When you look at the license tracker and look at the number of operational businesses, which we jumped in probably because we had our guest today, right? Data point, the data has not changed. It will change by the end of this week, though.
Let me tell you something, though. All this equity going on is great. It's great. It's great. But what you going to do about the illegal priority status? All this equity going on is great. DBEs, go ahead, add another 100 to the social equity cohort. That's fine. But none of those folks is in legislation. We are in legislation.
The economic empowerment certificate.
And what you going to do if we can finally get in front of a judge and litigate our position like Judge Scott Kafka suggested? What you going to do?
In terms of the accountability.
What you going to do? Because you can do all of these things, but they don't erase. They don't erase. They don't erase this illegal priority status. They don't erase this industrial and economic and corporate espionage. So they don't erase that. They don't erase that. And for Massachusetts to be so intelligent, such an intelligent group of folks in Massachusetts, we so smart in Massachusetts, right? I'm confused, Massachusetts. I'm confused because this diabolically affects everybody in Massachusetts who wanted to get into the cannabis industry. This affects our bottom line. The legislation said it was clear this is the revenue for the citizens of Massachusetts. And you got the Cannabis Control Commission, because it's an unregulated industry. It's not federally regulated. You got the Cannabis Control Commission taking advantage of that, allowing certain business, the Colorado 6 specifically is who we identify, allowing them to orchestrate hundreds of licenses going away to these individuals under the guise of equity, undercutting Massachusetts citizens who want to get in the industry. You're talking about $1 billion revenue stream. And I'm confused because I thought Massachusetts was more intelligent than that. Everybody all intelligent in Massachusetts, right? Y'all all smart. Y'all looking at me like I'm the dummy, but I'm trying to figure it out. Like, how come y'all can't? Because it's just plain as day right there. It's 1 + 1 = 2. So if anybody talk about they really for equity, give us a lawyer so we can litigate. So we can stand on our feet and not be on our knees begging for a position. If you really about equity, give us a lawyer, get us some make sure we can get a lawyer, because that's the hardest part. We done spoke to plenty of lawyers. That's how they keep us out. That's how from my observation as a black man in this country, anytime I try to get in the courts with some real shit, they keep you out of your day in court. Everybody has the right to be heard. Everybody has the right to their day in court, except when you're a black man, black woman, black folks. We just want our day in court. He's so crazy, so uncivilized online. I just want my day in court. Ain't that civil? So what are you? You keeping me out of my day in court? You don't got no problem arresting my black ass. I've been in court since I was 14. You don't got no problem holding me accountable. Since a child, tried to hold me accountable as a man. Charged me as a man for marijuana as a child. But you don't want to be held accountable. So I just want my day in court. We don't even need to do the online shit. Let us litigate our position, like Judge Scott Kafka said. Took over a little bit.
The message needs to be heard, absolutely. And I think when we talk about equity and the conversation does get lost because people just want to focus on, equity from the standpoint of marginalized groups and access for marginalized groups, never really factoring in what it means for an individual to be targeted simply because of their skin color, to have a war on drugs that was enacted so much so that you are dehumanized, your family is torn apart, and all of these, I call them collateral consequences. I don't call them. A lot of folks refer to it as collateral consequences for simply being Black. Coming from a place like New York, where they had stop and frisk, and coming from any place in this country where simply being Black means your interaction with the legal system is no longer necessarily an interaction with the justice system. And so here it is now. We are erecting an industry, and everyone's saying they want to correct the war on drugs. They want to ameliorate that. And when you talk about accountability, holding people accountable, you're speaking specifically here in Massachusetts about an injustice that was done in our legal market by our regulatory body, identified and recognized, and yet no form of redress for that. And to this day, I don't even know if the economic empowerment certificate holders have full access to the technical assistance that's provided to social equity program participants. We hold both statuses, and so we are able to leverage both. But I do, if I'm not mistaken, there was an EE who she's an economic empowerment certificate holder, but she does not qualify for social equity program, a Black woman, and she is not privy to the technical assistance. So while Massachusetts wants to give the messaging out there, and I'll say, for instance, today, and I'm going to talk about a little bit more with accountability, Commissioner Camargo did give some data when she started out her messaging to the Joint Committee on Cannabis Policy, the legislative body here, and she said, 500 folks in our equity program have access to technical assistance. Well, that 500 number includes the 123 EEs, and not all 123 EEs have access to that, from my understanding. If someone knows the correct information, we're not exclusive to the EE status. We do have the benefit of both, so it's not clear whether or not, and there was conversation from the commission last year to extend these resources to support EEs in the hopes that we would see that needle move. But when we speak to some of the EEs that we've spoken to, some have just been so disheartened by the treatment from our legal industry here and the regulatory body that they've just stayed and shied away completely. And others have shared, as I mentioned, the fact that they don't have access, or that has not been made aware. And if so, I think it's incumbent upon the commission to reach out to the participants to make it clear what resources are available to them. And when I say the participants, I mean in the EE ones, so that it's cleared up for them. Social equity folks, they're already tapped into the platforms where they can get this information, and once you come into the programming, that the programming involves technical assistance. Economic empowerment folks have been around before that programming was established by the regulatory body, and so that hasn't been made clear. I digress, delivering that piece of detail, but back to what you're saying with accountability. So we want to see accountability, and particularly we want to see accountability for the missteps that have happened every step of the way. I want to highlight, because I mentioned it, that in Massachusetts, our legislative body, the joint committee that we have that focuses on cannabis policy, had a meeting today, a public hearing today, where they talked about the Social Equity Fund and they talked about expungement. And I think I'd like for us to talk a little bit more about accountability in the lens of those two separate things. I know you have much to say about expungement, but if you can bear with me, let me talk about the some of the other things first, and then we'll move back to the expungement piece and how it currently stands. There is no accountability for actually addressing the harms done by the war on drugs. So very quickly, what was interesting with the policy hearing in general, right, was the fact that we shared last week, when we look at these bills don't get at the heart of it. We're still going to be faced with a lot of issues, and I'm not going to belabor that. Go back to our previous session from June 11th, and you can see what we talked about on Cannabis Equity Minutes with respect to the bills that currently exist. What I want to highlight is it's important in these arenas that those who hold the seat of power, that they speak up on behalf of the various communities. What do I mean? Commissioner Camargo was there, as she is a commissioner, and they recognized her that, but she made it clear that she was there on her own independent cognizance and accord. And so I thought that was alarming, and I thought it actually made me think, she's absolutely right. If this is a priority, if equity and equitable participation is a priority for Massachusetts, the way that they say it is, the way that the commission likes to present and really handle that rhetoric and dole that out optically to the public, then our executive director should have been at that table pushing for the urgency for a social equity fund. And the reason why I say that is because last year in our Massachusetts Marijuana Social Equity Report, and then subsequently in Cannabis Control Commission meetings, the chair and the executive director consistently pointed to a letter that they sent to the legislative body stating that they needed to be a legislative push around the Social Equity Fund, and they needed a vehicle so that they can then tap into monies that were being donated or that had been earmarked from private entities to go to equity program participants, but the commission said they didn't have an outlet for it legally, and so they needed the legislative body to step into that. And so what we should have seen was from the executive director and the chair, not just the social justice chair. It was very important that she was there, but we should have seen the level of urgency coming from, because it's a priority, right? So from the leadership down, and in any organization, when I do any type of consultancy work, whether it's in the field of education, whether it's in the field of real estate, whether it's in the field of cannabis, whether it's under whatever concept, whatever industry, it does not matter. If you want to see change in that industry, the change really, you need to see that change embraced by the leadership. And if the leadership in our cannabis industry, the regulatory body says that we want to have equity, we want to make equity a priority. Yes, we haven't been doing so for the last 2.5, 3 years since we've been operational as an agency, but we want to do so now. This was a missed opportunity. This was a missed opportunity for the leadership to be present. Now, again, Commissioner Camargo, who sits in the social justice chair, and again, important that she is there, and she was there to speak on behalf of the need for a social equity fund, and she did make that statement there. The previous social justice chair was not there, and one can say, well, that's no longer her role. Well, she has been present in other cannabis policy meetings. She was present for the meeting that they had last month around host community agreements.
She's still in the state?
I think her residence still is here in Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
But to your point, I guess she has moved on to work in other areas. But when it comes to some of the folks, they will reach out and recognize her commissionship here, recognize her as a former commissioner. And when you talk about the weight that people have from the roles that they play, whether it's a government position or a business leadership position, ownership position. These all play a role and when it comes to speaking before the legislative body, that it plays a factor in terms of how information is received. So
for all those people who don't know, Commissioner Camargo, she's black, right?
She identifies perception optically, she looks black, but I think she identifies as Latina. I think she's
Okay.
Nuri Camargo.
Okay.
She looks like a brown black woman. Yeah, a woman of color. I think she identifies as Latina. I don't want to misspeak.
So
but,
I'm not really fully familiar with her. My wife might be more than I am, but our objective is not to hop on these social justice chairs, even though they put it there to make it seem like it's an activist position. I have come to despise these uh, these people going to black folks in these paid positions at work, at jobs. First of all, you don't know what these folks, these minorities, these black folks got to take care of with that check. And then you ask them to be an activist. They can't be an activist. They're trying to this is a career. So they're trying to take this job and go to the next job. You understand me? So it's not fair for white folks or for the public at large to look at these folks like they're going to be activists or like they're going to stand for true social justice. They're going to hedge us. They have to. They're at work. You understand me? So, it's very myopic, in our viewpoint. And if white folks really want to make change, they need to ask individuals who are not on the job, who are not on the job, who are not politicians.
Which is why to get the change, right, you need the leadership to create that avenue and that space and the platform. And then you have the community, those who are the ones who are going to be impacted by the change. You give them the opportunity for their voice to be heard.
It's not like the civil rights days with the slick civil rights leaders. Like this, the information technology day, to put these individuals in front of us who's saying one thing, whether they black, brown, red, yellow, whatever color, to put these individuals in front of us, say one thing and then go do something else. Maybe that's why a lot of people ain't around politics, because it's bullshit. And if this wasn't weed, cannabis, if this hadn't been part of my politics for my whole life, if I hadn't been made a child soldier at 13, inducted in this war against black folks, barely can read in the third grade, you understand me, fashioned for this school to prison pipeline, I wouldn't be political. I wouldn't be a part of this. I wouldn't be, relevant to the subject. You understand? So and then you talking about real individuals who really went through real things in their life, who this is still affecting, folks who they know and love, and we know the war on drugs to be something that you could never heal. You can't never heal. You can't heal how you heal killing folks and hunting folks and treating folks and subjugating folks to less than-ness and doing all of these things based on an illusory war. How you say that? Illusory war. Yeah, that war. An illusion.
An illusion. Illusory.
Yeah, a made-up war. A made-up war that you is acting on black folks. Because if it wasn't made up, the same thing happening to white folks in the white community right now. But what you doing? You building buildings that they can go shoot up, and you letting them shoot up and calling it, a medical condition to that the community needs to heal. You called it a war against us. You called us predators. You called it a war against. You made it a war against us when our community needs to heal. And then we seen that, you invited these things to introduce these things to our neighborhood. So no, you can't. For them to say they're going to do something about the war on drugs, they don't even understand that. And most black folks around it You know, we've been so beat up in their mind is on survival. They haven't been able to think objectively about that and what that really meant.
And digest what is the impact of
Yeah,
that? What that could actually mean to begin to heal and have something done about all of the trauma, all of the pain, the cost, the high cost that they paid because they have been affected and targeted by the war on drugs.
And even what it even meant. What that even meant. What was the war on drugs? Because people think it's just arrest, and arrest was a product of this war. White supremacy, you understand me, is the thing that nobody's talking about, which is a product of the arrest or the war on drugs and every other thing that you could just call it a different name. Okay, the war on drugs is gone. Black folks still getting arrested. Before it was called stop and frisk, they was going through our pockets, going through our drawers, making you strip in the park in front of everybody, all up in you, up under you, looking at you, everything. Now that's coming to light. Somebody videoed that, how they were stripping young boys and stuff. They was doing that to us. You know, doing all that shit, strip searching us and shit, illegal searching. You know, before they even called it a little cute name like stop and frisk. That's cute. That's what happened to me. You know, but you know, this war was bigger than just arrests. You know, they had to dehumanize, and that was TV. They had to dehumanize our depiction, our color. So, you know, you talking about wealthy Black folks went through this, had to go through it. They had to go through that same white supremacy teaching. Their money ain't the same. That $100 million ain't the same $100 million if they was white. You understand me? They ain't spent the same way. They still go through the same discrimination, and they still subject to the same white supremacy, paying more for the same stuff. So being a wealthy Black person don't make you exempt from it. That's what some white folks is pushing. Being a wealthy Black person don't Michelle Obama is subject to it. Everybody, we all subject to it, you know. That's the war on drugs. You're talking about a whole culture of white supremacy. You understand me? It far extends past the streets, schools, everything. It permeated the facet of how you think and look and see when you think about Black folks. That's why I be posting pictures of my beautiful Black family. Got to make that distinction. Some white folks don't know why he got to say Black family. Why he got to say in the hashtags I be saying like Black love, Black, 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 Black. Because I got to. We got to.
It's to counter the negative impact and the negative stereotypes that have existed and have been ingrained in our subconscious through the media, through policy, through education. These are things that go. It's so ingrained in our society that to make that distinction, like no one gets upset when you say, "Oh, a woman this, woman that," knowing full well that there's male Americans and there are female Americans, but no one gets upset about that. But when we sit there and make a distinction of an identifying factor that just our society has been operating on, it becomes problematic. But our society has been doing this. It was founded on that distinction. We go back into our founding documents.
We don't control our narrative. We haven't been allowed to control our narrative. So that's whenever we can put our narrative out there and control our narrative. You understand me? You know, the TV shows and everything, we don't get to control our narrative. So for you to tear down Black families and Black this and that and say the fathers ain't home. Yes, I'm here every day. What you mean? Black fathers don't stay. What you talking about? And I know it's a lot of us.
And you're not an anomaly or an exception, and that's part of the need to counter the narrative and the stereotypes that tend to permeate our society through the various forms, highlighting education, media, even in terms of when you look at data, the data may say one thing, but it doesn't provide the context as to why the data is that way. So, that goes a little bit beyond the scope of what I wanted to talk about this evening. But
you're talking about war on drugs, and this is something that you can't do. You can't. So it would have been more formidable to say that you're going to do something about cannabis arrests. Because to deal with the cannabis arrests, You know, you deal with the victims of this war directly, but you can't do nothing about the war on drugs. And they're not trying to do nothing about the war on drugs. All these places went legal, but you still mass incarcerating us behind weed. You understand me? You know, that's something that America is going to have to deal with. Every generation, they want to start us over and tell us, oh, we need to understand what we're doing. And then
we need to do research. And we need more data.
You got new college students coming out, just like Black Panthers. Black Panthers college students. And so to me, when you go put the Black Panther, that's a parody. You killed college students. So now you got these other college students thinking they smart and they the first ones to be liberators or to think and to be, you know, whatever, revolutionary. You know, you got
part because they didn't teach when they teach our history and our education.
But to think like that, college folks, I want you to go check out a book. Go check out The Miseducation of the Negro.
Carter G. Woodson.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you a book. Just ask me for one. I'll give you one. Go check out The Miseducation of the Negro. To hear us speak so profoundly, go check out our IG page. I post up some old school folks talking, you know, on a whole level of intellect that we just catching the ball and then they just kind of just restarting the cycle. The new name is equity or economic empowerment or social equity. When at the end of it, at the core of it, now is white supremacy. When it was civil rights, it was white supremacy.
Jim Crow.
Jim Crow was white supremacy. When it was the Red Summers, it was white supremacy. When it was slavery, it was white supremacy. Seminole Wars, it was white supremacy. You understand me? This is what we've been having to deal with, and you know they keep moving the names, and then they get these.
And so, in moving the names, it gives this illusion that this is something new, and we're finally wrapping our brain around it. When in fact, no, this is part of the sophistication of it. It's a ploy. It makes it, you know, it plays into the psyche to think that we're making progress when in fact, no, we're not making progress. We're actually making regress because to the point in terms of some of the things that you said. One, for example, there is a release that's about to happen with James Baldwin. Mm-hmm. He did an interview with ABC News, and it was they felt that it was so controversial that they didn't put it out. And so here it is. This interview is probably 50, 60 years old. And the content that he's talking about still applies to this day. And they're just now, ABC is not the one putting it out. I think someone else that has control of this estate finally got the rights to it, and they're putting that information out. And then also the fact that across the country there is these arguments and all-out legislative battles around critical race theory and just the teaching of information, historical information through the perspective or from the perspective of or the narratives of folks that are it's not white centered, right? Whether it's from the perspective of Black folks, and by Black that can be both slaves, those who are indigenous to this land, who became slaves, Africans who came over here or who were brought over here, however you want to identify the origination of these folks who are melanated, and they now just use the term Black to describe and refer to that. All of that, you see these battles happening right now across the country in our legislative body, where they don't even want to teach that. They want to remove these details from our history. And in removing it, these are folks that have a concept of the impact of legacy, right? They understand if they remove it from our education now and they can train what the children are being taught, then we're going to be able to perpetuate the status quo that we currently have, which, as you've identified, is just a form of white supremacy. And then
and that's white fragility right there. You know, why can't we talk about history accurately as viewed through the eyes of all of the groups? If you're talking about being inclusive, let alone you're talking about a historic group, Black folks. We still ain't talking about our history. You don't know about MOVE. Nobody's talking about MOVE. What happened to they didn't move in Philadelphia? Go check
in the 1980s.
Go check that out, young folks, and anybody who wants to check it out. MOVE, MOVE, in Philadelphia. Go check that story out. Why is that not talked about? They don't talk about our history. They don't talk about what's going on right here, right now. They don't talk about all of the inventions and things that we've invented, and they don't talk about our contribution in the wars, our contribution in none of this stuff. We participated in every war, you know.
Can I interject right there and tying back to the focus for tonight's conversation around accountability? Why is that important? One of the things that a misstep when it comes to accountability with our current society is when we push for integration, and I say we because there were all types of folks pushing for integration. We pushed for children, for schools, for our school systems to have Black and white children in the same facilities, but there was no accountability put in place to ensure that the content that was being taught to our children was edifying. There was no accountability, and there still isn't any accountability for what is being actually taught and indoctrinated, because that's what the way the American education system is. It's a form of indoctrination, right? When you look at all the standardized testing and so forth, and what the expectation is around this Common Core curriculum. So there was no accountability there. And fast forward, we're dealing with all of this lack of independent thinking, or we're dealing with the ramifications of systemic, folks tend to use the phrase systemic racism that we see in our education system, where we've centered education on whiteness. We've centered the concept of what it means to be American around whiteness, so much so for us to bring in anything that talks otherwise is an attack against the American society. So there was no accountability there, and we're dealing with the ramifications of that. That, to your point, we have the same issue, and it's translating here in this cannabis space, and it was no different with the bills that are being pushed forward around the social equity fund and the need for a social equity fund. One of the points, when just to reiterate, when I was bringing up the executive director and the chair and the role that they played, perhaps not necessarily being the ones to lobby on specific bills, but their presence in indicating the urgency and the priority for the legislative body in terms of pushing a bill, something forward, so that they can then do what they need to do, supposedly which has been their argument. But there's no accountability there. There's no one holding them to the fire for this. And I've said this consistently, that this agency has such a broad range of authority and very little in terms of who they answer to. You know, you were mentioning earlier how the agency wants to execute enforcement actions against businesses. They went so far as sent us a threat letter because we have sat here and boldly identified the missteps, the injustices, what has been happening.
I would like to know who thought that was a good idea to send a police threat letter to equity folks in your program. I want to know who thought that was a good idea. You understand me? Like, that's insane. You talking about, you know, you understand equity and you want to effectuate equity. You talking about the war on drugs. And then you're going to send a threat letter to arrest a Black family, to arrest equity.
Pushing for accountability, because that's all this is, right? If you look at everything, it's always pushing for accountability. And when you push for accountability, there is oftentimes, you can ask any of these folks that are dealing with an enforcement action. You can ask anyone that has to answer to someone else. Accountability isn't always fun. It doesn't feel good. It's not comfortable, because if it was comfortable, then we wouldn't even need it. But the reason why you put accountability in place is so that people are not taken advantage of, so that systems do not, or those in power do not abuse their power. That's supposedly why we have to be able to not
even be able to have a voice is to be treated subhuman. And so to invite us to finally, after years, to invite us to the forum, to act like we had a voice.
And I want to clarify, there was a forum that the Cannabis Control Commission in Massachusetts held in January of 2020, where they prioritized and gave opportunities for equity program participants and then any other businesses to speak to the commission directly about some of the concerns and issues that they were having entering into this industry, meaning securing a license, obtaining a license. And so that was in January of last year. They invited the social equity and the economic empowerment folks, well, they opened it up for everyone, but they gave priority to those participants to come speak and express their concerns, frustration, ask questions of the commission. This was an opportunity that had not existed prior to that date. And so,
how many years were we?
so this is 2020, and we have been licensing had been opened up since May of 2018. So we were going on the third year, May to June of 2019.
We spoke at the forum. We spoke at the forum.
2 years.
We spoke at the forum. We contacted them, asked to be a part of the decision making, and we've got nothing but hostile treatment for a group that publicly they say, "Oh, I don't understand equity. I want to understand equity," and for us to be around and offering our services for the last 3 years to be in their program and to have to resort to doing lives publicly because we tried to we actually are part of equity people who have economic empowerment status are actually a part of the legislative charge, just as much as part of the legislative charge to effectuate equity as the Cannabis Control Commission. You understand me? So to be at the table, legislation say we got a seat at the table. To be at the table and to be ignored, you understand me? To be ignored the whole time when we were at the table offering suggestions. The only suggestions, the PIES program is the only program I know that kills all the barriers of entry. You understand me? That deals with the illegal priority status. You understand? So,
when you bring up the PIES program, I want to highlight that because I think one of the things that came up in the social equity policy joint committee meeting for cannabis policy, they talked about Oakland, and they talked about other places that have done some things around more providing funding for equity participants. When we put together the PIES program, we recognized that a lot of the things that were in existence did not have that accountability piece in place. And then we also recognized that there were no funding options for equity program participants in Massachusetts, and people wanted to talk about the predatory lenders and so forth. Instead of addressing that from the lens of, okay, well, this is who the folks have access to. These are the folks that are offering money to work with them. And if we're so concerned about the predatory aspect of it, then let's put supports and measures in place to address that. Instead, they just cut it off and said, you know what, we're not going to do anything to support you. In fact, you better stay away from any type of predatory lending because you're not going to be able to have a successful business. You're going to lose your business. So really strumming on the fears of folks who already had all of these barriers that have been identified. And so
the attacks ensue. These white folks around equity who claim to be proponents for equity continue to attack businesses who are working with equity folks. It seems to be like the only businesses being attacked that I see are working with equity folks because nobody has any problem with all these other businesses, how they do business.
Now remember, there are 247 licenses that are operating in this state, and those 247 licenses perhaps represent about I can't remember the number of entities, maybe 100, let's say roughly 100 entities. So different businesses, because one business can have 3 or 4 licenses depending on if they have a cultivation license, product manufacturing license, a retail license, and then a transporter license. So a marijuana transporter license. So that would be 4 licenses that a potential entity could have, up to 4 licenses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the times the conversations tend to hone in on maybe 2 or 3 of the license of the actions of a handful of these operators, completely missing the boat or turning a blind eye on some of the other operators and what they're doing. And
it'd be these guys' personal beef. And when it really comes to solutions for equity, they don't fucking support solutions. They just got people running around acting crazy, yelling at certain operators that they don't like. You understand me? Which don't have nothing to do about the plans. Like if we got these people, if we had these individuals pushing the POS program, or if we had these individuals coming behind us, working with us on putting out equity reports, actually just doing action reports, observing, investigating, and just calling the shit out.
As opposed to doing it across the board, not cherry picking to your point, right? And I'm just, I guess, reiterating what you're saying, cherry picking who they have their own personal issues with, and then thereby turning the attention of the public to these particular entities, and not recognizing that if we want to address equity, it has to be something that is systematic and is consistent across the board. If what you're doing, if the actions that you're taking under the guise of equity is not consistent across the board or does not apply across the board, then it becomes an issue of a personal beef. You are no longer an advocate of equity. You are simply pimping the equity cause for your personal interest. And we see that significantly. We see that emerging in several areas by certain vocal people. Whereas what we're putting out, would we benefit from it? Absolutely. Would every other economic empowerment certificate holder or social equity program participant that chooses to participate benefit from it? Absolutely. It's consistent across the board.
I don't know nobody who put out something for everybody. Whether they like us or don't like us, if they in the equity program, they benefit from the PIES program. They benefit from the PIES program. So we talking about everybody talking about, barriers of entry, money, The PIES program, we got you, covered it. The PIES program, we covered it. So if we really talking about equity, what we playing about? We got a program. A Black woman in the program wrote the PIES program, and it kills every barrier of entry that everybody's complaining about. Because Grant ain't pushing it, because Shailene, a white man, ain't pushing it, because Shailene ain't pushing it, we ain't getting behind it. Joe, man, like, you know what I'm saying? We've been pushing, we've been having this ready. This has been here for the last 2 years. We had this ready for y'all. You understand me? And it's really, I'm questioning, I'm just questioning people's intelligence. And it's all game. You know what I'm saying? It's all game, it's all politics. It's all game and politics. Because when we created something real, we got attacked. You know what I'm saying? That's how I know these guys is phony. Because the same folks that's going around talking about these corporations going around talking about my wife and I. Lies. Going around lying about us. We like, wow, how is MRCC? How is Grant? How are these individuals, Shailene, how are these individuals proponents of equity, but they going around lying about us? Shailene telling people not to work with us. A cannabis control commissioner telling people who we paid, to work with us, when they go say, hey, well, let me go talk to my commissioners and connections, and talk to them about.
Or tell them what we're doing, tell them what I plan on doing to help promote equity in this industry.
Don't work with them.
But if you look historically, you see that type of behavior whenever you see people pushing things that are actually going to change the status quo. And so you have to go back and ask, well, perhaps the goal isn't to actually effectuate equity. It's just rhetoric. And whenever you bring a solution that's going to actually challenge the status quo and execute on that rhetoric, then all of a sudden you'll see who the true proponents of equity are. Bottom line.
Yeah, I was never really familiar with that rhetoric directly affected me. So I really wasn't that close to it. So when they said these things publicly, I was like, oh shit, here I am. Y'all want to know, you want to talk? I got a story to tell. I put a whole book together based on the forum. It's called Massachusetts Jumping Jim Crow for Cannabis. It's on Amazon. Kindle. Mm-hmm. It's on Amazon. Massachusetts Jumping Jim Crow for Cannabis. But I thought I would be welcomed. There wasn't nothing combative when we came out. It was like, oh shoot, we got some solutions. Check this out. We in the program. What's up? So it wasn't nothing trying to be combative. It was all behind the scenes, and you know, the way they treated us, you know, in the program and then publicly acting like, okay, yeah, we really want to know what's going on. But when I was there to tell them what was going on, because wasn't much folks around to tell them what was going on about that
And you
experience.
still see that. You still see their.
But publicly they say, oh, I want to know, I want to know. They don't want to know. After we spoke to Hoffman, we got arrest threats. We got arrest threats from Collins. I asked to speak with Collins. Instead of
He
speaking,
said no.
instead of Collins speaking with me like a man, he gonna send arrest threats to my wife and I. And you know, I would much rather speak behind closed doors. We don't got to speak publicly. If I can speak to you directly, speak to these individuals directly. You understand me? But how these individuals are operating are criminal. I don't have anything to say to Collins at this point, except we need some new leadership at the Cannabis Control Commission. You know, and hopefully one day I see your ass in court. You understand me? Because obviously you don't want to respect me in that fashion. So maybe we can get some respect when I litigate. You understand? Put some respect on my name when we litigate.
Interestingly enough, so I guess we have been on here for some time. I'm going to highlight the fact that the Cannabis Control Commission will be having their monthly meeting for the month of June in 2 days from today, so on the 17th of June. And it's something that is televised, and there will be the Executive Director Collins will be giving an update on the social equity programming. Perhaps they'll be announcing the fact that they're going to be opening up for the next cohort, or perhaps they may just be actually giving out the data that they should have provided to the public um, since if they were being consistent in terms of how they did it with the first social equity program participants. They released that information to the public, I think, in September of 2019. They did not do that for the second cohort. Maybe perhaps with this update, we'll get that.
We've seen a lot of lack of genuineness. You know, they act as if they can't aggregate the data in a certain way that's just comprehensible. Yeah, whether it's good, whether it's reflecting good, bad, ugly, or indifferent, the Cannabis Control Commission. Here it is, equity, victims of marijuana mass incarceration is a very political thing. But everybody at the Cannabis Control Commission is worried about their jobs. Again, we're asking people at their jobs. Sean Collins, all these folks and people to do revolutionary stuff over what happened to the black community, black and brown community. And we're seeing them fall short every time, and seeing them make, you know, biased decisions that go against the people who they're supposed to be doing something for. You understand? So, you know, they completely betrayed equity, the first commission, Collins. They completely betrayed the citizens of Massachusetts, if you ask me. You know, you're talking about almost a 600-day equity period for out-of-state folks. What you call that?
Again, accountability. Where is the accountability? How is that being addressed and redressed? I did say I would give you an opportunity to speak on expungement. That was something else that came up. And when I talk about accountability in the expungement in the context of accountability, the push right now, because we have expungement in Massachusetts. So if you have like low-level cannabis charges, marijuana charges, particularly around possession, you can have your record expunged, but you got to go through a whole process. And it's not, some folks say, I've never gone through it. I don't know what the particular details of it, but anything where you have to involve legal attorney and all, et cetera, to access records and so forth, you're starting to talk about costs and fees. So the conversation is moving towards revising the existing expungement legislation to make it automatic. Now, the issue is expungement is the new, I guess, carrot that's being delivered or hung in front of us as the form of restorative justice for the war on drugs, expungement. And we have spent countless times, and I realize, you can't argue with people who want to hold tight to a perception You can simply put that information out, and at some point, in hopes that it will click in the minds of folks who choose to separate from the mass thinking. But what was this record tied to? This was a record that was imposed on an individual wrongly, and it was imposed by our government. So when you say that you're going to expunge this person's record, who does that benefit, and how is that restorative? Because what you've done is you've sealed the actions of the government.
Not just that, you turned it into a joke. You talking about you had a war against the people because of their skin color, not just that you attacked children. You attack children. I mean, there's literature out on this that goes down to the psyche of this and how our children are attacked from schools and all of this stuff. That's why I always bring the schools into it, because that's the biggest travesty of it all. War on drugs, you're talking about the American public school systems. Not just that, private school systems also. But you're talking about our school systems.
American education system.
Yeah. So you're attacking Black children. You understand me? And you're creating this criminality. You understand? And through the war on drugs. So to trivialize it to down to expungements is a joke. You're talking about a war.
And the restorative act is expungement.
You sick. America is a sick motherfucker. She is a sick individual. When you look at how she treated Black folks, can you say she is not? So she's been sick. She's been horrendous. She's been a horror story for Black folks behind a war on drugs. And you got Black folks who in paid positions, who are politicians or whatever, champion expungements. You know.
And why? Under the guy.
We can't be the next generations of jokes. I'm sorry, Black folks. We got it's the information technology. So, and then you're dealing with a whole different type of individual. A lot of folks like me. So you got to deal with us in a real type of way. You can't tell us one thing publicly and then first of all, you're talking about you're going to direct something toward our group and nobody in our group get it. We ain't get shit. Hold up, what you give me? Nothing. Then you talking about you are not even dealing with it in a real sort of way. You're not dealing with it in a real sort of way because you didn't even ask us what we want. And nothing has been looked at us for this war you had against us. So how do we get past that when you won't even address it? We don't get past it. And then you have this little dog and pony show like, oh, it's funding. Oh, there's equity. Oh, this is going to do it. No, that's not going to do it. You know, first, what's going to do it is a conversation. You haven't had a real conversation with the American public about what you did with to Black folks in America, from gangs, cracks, all of these things that you did in the projects and the hoods and the ghettos that you created and made us into these monsters, to these American niggas. You understand me? These things, these monsters who you deliver to the public, like niggas, American niggas, like monsters. This was all a part of this war. So you're not talking about the traumatic stress, the PTSD, the present traumatic stress, because we still got to go outside Black in America. We still dealing with it from every angle. Don't talk about it. I'm from the banking to housing to loans for businesses to property to land to anything you want to do in America. We still got to go through the white channels to get it and to be a part of it. We don't control any industry in America. So now here we are. Are we going to get intelligent about this, or are we just going to take some pats on the head and some crumbs and then deal with this for a whole nother generation because you acting crazy? This is about young Black folks, old Black folks, middle-aged Black folks. This is about all of us. We are a community. So there are so many different types of Black folks. Ain't just one type of Black folk. I'm not just the only type of Black folks. And there's a lot like me and there's a lot like other folks. But this is a community. So we all need to be able to have this say, especially Black men, brown men who directly was affected by this. You understand me? That's what I've seen. I've seen a lack of respect for that. Folks, folks who was directly affected by this being allowed to, articulate, or being allowed to communicate and orate, being allowed to be a part of the conversation. That's what I've seen, a lack of that.
And I think to your point, what I wanted to drive when we talk about restorative justice and the abomination to say that expungements is a form of restorative justice, it doesn't restore anything. It erases a part of that person's history. It erases a part of our American history, but it has not restored. And there hasn't been any bold proposals around restorative justice and restorative actions that can begin to ameliorate some of the trauma and the impact or the consequences from the war on drugs. And to your point about bringing people to the conversation who have actually gone through this experience, bringing Black men to the forefront of this conversation. Oftentimes what we have is what I was trying to say with where the way the expungement is currently set up, it's only for people who just have that minor possession offense. And we know what happens when you get into the system. The minute you get into the system, the likelihood for recidivism, the likelihood for you to be caught up in something even greater rises exponentially. And so if you got into the system because of some, trumped up minor marijuana charge when you were young, and you're in the system and you faltered, and then you get caught up in something else, you were precluded from pursuing higher education, you were precluded from pursuing certain job opportunities, you were precluded from participating in this industry as a full citizen because of minor issues that now have become exacerbated. And now in the legal industry, you are still excluded from this industry because it's no longer just a minor drug possession on your record. It has evolved over the years into certain other things, and now you still can't get into this industry because even if they were to quote unquote do you a favor and expunge that record, it doesn't address everything else. And so I think that's one aspect of expungement. And the second aspect, I would entertain expungement because for our children who are just growing up, they're just now turning 14, 15 teenage years over these last several years, and it's legalized, but they somehow still have a record. We owe something to them. We owe something to them. I mean, even to the adults who've lived 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years with this, right? We owe something to them, and erasing is not a form of payment.
It doesn't erase the trauma of how did you get arrested? Did they put guns in your face? Did they tackle you? Did they beat you? It doesn't deal with that trauma. You understand me? It doesn't deal with that. It doesn't deal with any of it. You understand me?
And some of the other things that I highlighted that you were denied the opportunity to even participate in these aspects.
And it doesn't deal with the fact that it's still happening. How can you be expunging? It's still happening. And you still arresting children. Like now, today, tonight. In every legal state. And in states that's not legal, it's still happening. How you expunging anything and it's still happening. It's still happening. Expunging records hasn't stopped the arrest. So how can you give it to us and feed it to us like it's something good and it's poison? If it doesn't stop the mass incarceration, like we are on a low level of thinking, and and I don't think these folks are not intelligent.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that these folks are at a job. I think these folks are just leading organizations. And so I don't want to make it personal against these Black organizations who I have personal dealings with. And, but I don't really care nothing about none of that, because I'm genuine in my efforts and I know I'm right with my ancestors, so If you right with your ancestors, there's no way you can have a problem with me, you know, because you be moving in accordance with your ancestors. So, you know, I'm always moving with my ancestors and the collective. You understand me? So, you know, I'm not here to get into it with anybody, but right now at this point, this is important to our ancestors. This is going to affect, and this is to ameliorate a lot of what our families have been through. This is to restore generational wealth. This is to restore Black families. And this is an important time. And we have to make sure America is clear about what she is saying to us at this point. Because what was that? You said I'm sorry for what? I can't hear you. I didn't hear. You guys are brushing past that shit. Like, hold up. After all we've been through, you can't just brush past that. I'm sorry, America. And was that? And I'm sorry in Massachusetts. Was that I'm sorry in Colorado? Was that I'm sorry in Georgia? Was that I'm sorry in New York? I'm confused. DC, you talking about I'm sorry? You opening up? I'm confused because I'm barely hearing the apology. You understand me? And we ain't doing it for pats on the head. We doing it for participation monetarily to restore generational wealth in our families. We doing it to participate in this weed industry, however you want to do it.
But yeah, don't tell me you're sorry. Show me you're sorry.
That's an action word, ain't it? Action. Sorry, right?
Show me.
Show me.
So to that point with restorative justice, it's in the word restore. What are you restoring if you are simply expunging? You haven't made the person whole.
And to see little girls being yoked up in California, I can't get over that. That's stained in my brain because I got a little girl. She's 16 years old. And this little girl was younger than that. And I couldn't imagine some cop on her like that. Like, in what way are we supposed to operate? And you talking about he was on her like that for weed? Right after they had the expungement parties that weekend in California.
Yep.
You had a cop yoking up a Black girl 2 days later
because
weed.
He thought she smelled like weed. She didn't even have it on her.
So all these folks, because I didn't who told me that they doing these expungements for the children. Where y'all at for the children when it really count? When they going into these jails, when they got public defenders, when they getting these charges, y'all not there for the children. You there because somebody told you to be here for these expungements so you can be a blackface. And it's nothing that's doing nothing for it don't do shit for our community. It look good in the headlines. Again, people at jobs, Black folks, brown folks making decisions for our folks, supposed to be revolutionary decisions over shit that done happened to Black folks, trauma, war, and y'all acting like it wasn't nothing. And I can't hear the apology. And we need to really make sure as if she's saying it, because I don't even think it's an apology because we still getting arrested. When did the war stop?
I know with our children, we can't say, you can't tell me you're sorry, and then you turn around and keep doing the same thing. You're not sorry. You're not sorry. Plain and simple. Not just children in a relationship. You can't tell me you're sorry, and then you turn around and you keep doing the same thing. You're not sorry.
That's an abusive relationship.
That's an abuse.
We in an abusive relationship with America. We can't even speak up about what we're going through.
So,
and we being big, and then over what we going, and I'm just speaking about Massachusetts, but over what we going through in Massachusetts, we got white folks leading the programs, and Black folks, real ones who in the programs try to weigh in on the programs, and you got this white man going all around lying about us, and that's okay. That's okay. The social justice chair,
I think
celebrating this dude. The old one and the new one, and all the cannabis groups celebrating this dude who went around defaming people in the equity program, lies to defame us, to make us look bad. I'm like, yo, whoa.
So a couple of things there, right? One is the fact that it's there are people who will say, "Well, I didn't hear it, I didn't see it," and so for them it didn't happen. And I think that's probably part of the problem
No,
as to
no.
why we continue to experience the problems that we have is because people don't realize that if you don't take the time to research something and you just decide that you're going to take something at face value, you run the risk of perpetuating the very thing that you think you're standing against, which is, to your point, what you're saying.
My
Because
assumption.
a lot of the defamation and attack against us from the particular character that you're mentioning was behind the scenes. And the reason why we knew about it is because uh, it started on the front end, but then when they realized that, oh, we were active participants and vocal, then it turned behind the scenes. It was a lot of these things were said in exclusive spaces, and it was brought to our attention. People were saying, hey, I asked about you and I received a backlash. Or people said, I asked or I mentioned you and this was the message that was sent to me. And so I think
Whatever the case may be, that's personal. I'm not telling you that for a personal reason. The reason why I'm telling you is because we have to put 1+1 together. And you talking about you got a white man around equity. He for equity. I've been on his show. We did his show. I got his phone number. I thought we was cool. But as soon as we put out a solution for equity, he attacks us with lies, starts going behind our back, spreading lies. And you got to ask yourself, is that white man about equity? And then to still see him touted about equity. And I'm like, yo, hey, community, this is what happened to us. This was our experience with this white man, Grant Smith. And to you do what you would with the information, what you want. But we put out the actual screenshots of what he was telling folks about us.
always. I mean, it's part of the call, right? If you want to say something as a black person, you have to come. I know everything that I say. I have to come with the receipts. I have to come 10 times better and 10 times more correct, more thorough, more exact. T's crossed, I's dotted, periods in check, and a question mark if there's a question mark that needs to be in place. And he could just make a blanket statement. All
So for him to tout that he's about equity, but he attacked the only people who came with a solution about equity years ago. How can he be about equity? I'm confused. And what solution does he have? None. None. And he only like black folks he can lead around. Black folks he can interpret the legislation to.
So if I could tie that to the theme for today in terms of accountability, to those
Grant Smith is our accountability over equity. It seems to be in Massachusetts. That's some shit. That's the shit show we in. That's the level of.
I'm not gonna give him that much credit.
No. That's how they. What you mean? What you mean? What you mean? Grant Smith has been the man. Grant Smith has been the man behind equity in Massachusetts, and
in the public
both
sphere,
commissioners shouted him out. They take his suggestions. What was that? Where they just started? It was the Grant Smith show where they was just saying all the Grant's suggestions. He seems to be able to get the equity, and that's the other thing about accountability, releasing the information. How is Grant Smith releasing information that
about the commission that the public hasn't had, and he's not even part of the equity program? Okay, I stand corrected.
Why is the commission giving Grant Smith equity information first? And making the public go to Grant Smith as if he's the lead on equity.
And the commission does have a whole communication team. I know they may try to argue and say that they were looking for someone for community outreach, but they do have a whole communication arm. And yeah, they could technically leverage their public engagement from that perspective.
An individual who has been seen to be a liar because what he said about us wasn't true. The things that he was spreading about us for years that he's probably still saying, it's not true. He has my phone number. He's showed himself to lack integrity. Never got a phone call from him. I have an interview I did with Grant. It's nothing but a conversation. He never had that conversation. He just immediately started running to the public about these lies about my wife and I being tied to these businesses, certain businesses and stuff. And that's not the problem because we pointed out how MRCC was pushing 10% deals, not us. We pushed 100% deal. That's what the pies. Did he tell you guys we pushing 100% deal? We've been pushing 100% deal for over a year now. The pies program. We never pushed a 10% deal like Grant Smith was going around telling people. Oh, don't. Those guys are just in town for the opportunity, like Shailene was. My wife is from here. Shailene's corporate is just in town for the opportunity. But this is what he tried to. Why would he? How could he be a proponent for equity and just go around lying about people in equity just trying to do good? Some naive folks who ain't been around politics, just naive enough to think that, oh, you guys just need some solutions. And we got some solutions. We offer solutions and all hell breaks loose. And we like, oh, hell not. We ain't like that. We ain't like that at all. Y'all confused about us because our name ain't out there. We not like that at all. You understand me? And matter of fact, y'all about to get this. You ain't about to act like I ain't got a trillion ancestors behind me. What's wrong with you?
Another trillion in front of me.
Come on, dude. I won't ever tire. I won't ever tire. My endurance, I will go on forever. Come on, I got a 100-day workout where I worked out for over 100 days for over an hour.
Oh, those were averaging like 90 minutes to 2 hours.
I don't tire. I got the ancestors flowing through me. That's not me. That's the ancestors. Everywhere I go with so much weight on me right now, I'm about to burst this chair about to explode under me. I'm wondering how it's holding up. I got trillions of ancestors sitting with me, speaking through me, flowing through me. So whoever wanted whatever, it's not a problem for me. It's not a problem for us. But this is a real thing. You had a war against the people. You can't just throw that word around. So you're talking to a child soldier. And you're talking about to all these child soldiers, these black children that you got guns in their face and that you beating them up. My first time being beat up in hell interrogated for 12 hours. You talking about war crimes. I was 13 years old.
I need you to say that again because I think it's not real unless folks have actually been through that or have friends that have been through it. It's like the concept of that.
It was about 6 of us. 6 of us. Hell, for over an hour, took to an undisclosed location. We still don't even know where the hell we was at. We were children. They beat us up, interrogated us for over 12 hours without our parents there.
Who's that?
The police. Some undercover police, because they was investigating robberies. And they came into the park in plain clothes with baseball shirts on and shit. I remember that shit. I'm 40 years old. It happened to me when I was 13. And they took us to some undisclosed location, hog-tied and shit. Couldn't even see where the fuck we was at and going. And kept us for over 12 hours and dropped me off kicked us all out in front of my mom's house on Independence and Rutland. They said, we making one stop where y'all want to go. I said, you better drop me off in front of my mama's house because she ain't going to believe this shit. My moms came running outside. Everybody throwing our bikes out. They ain't answer her questions. They just sped off in the little paddy wagon, big paddy wagon, the truck. Like a motherfucking UPS delivery van. So you talking about this criminality still happening to children, to babies. You understand me? To babies. We're being introduced to this thuggery, turned into child soldiers. So either you, what is it? And everybody want to put the hood down. You know what I see? I see a world in love with the hood. Because I came up when the hood was just a small group. We are celebrated. Street niggas, thug niggas are celebrated all over the world. Our culture we was outcasts. Everything we doing is cool. Y'all now the weed is cool. Everybody rap. You can't go to no corporate place without them talking the hip hop lingo of the day, or probably yesterday, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but they still talking hip hop. Rap is all over the place. You understand? What we created from nothing. I guarantee you, 80 years, 50 years from now, they're going to be talking about us. Everybody going to be idolizing us. Every time a new rap song come out, everybody's saying it. Whoop-dee. That's gang shit. Whoop-dee. Everything. I don't even remember the shit. After the big homie shot it down, I just got it out my mind. With your boy, CJ Whoop-dee. young boy out of the thing, he's got his politics. I ain't getting to the gang politics. But what I'm trying to say is Pop Smoke, Snoop Dogg, every rapper, all these rappers from the hood, they got these jingles, they come out, representing their gang, representing their clique, and it's a jingle across the world. Everybody. Pop Smoke got this line said, walking this spot, turn everybody crib. So you talking about people who are staring adverse situations in the eye and they make a decision. They're like, yo, I'm gonna be a thug nigga, I'm gonna be a street nigga. You can sit up in school where they tell you you're a failure, where you look at these white folks who don't got nothing to do with you, or you could get your respect how you get your respect. And that's when I came up in the era when there was a place where if we didn't fit in the schools, that's it. The streets, that's where you got your respect at. There needs to be other outlets. But I think it's a spiritual thing that warriors, as young children, you understand me? We can't get with that information. I never was good in school, always in the principal's office. Indoctrination. So, we are people idolized, and you want to act like it's not no love for us. But I seen y'all fall in love with us. I seen the world copy everything that the hood was doing, still to this day. And it was started out as small. Small. It was nothing popular. Nothing popular about this in the 80s and 90s. It started getting popular more so in the 90s, the late 90s. And they started bringing the lingo into the corporate America. And you couldn't sell it. You can't sell a commercial without hip hop. All in the TV shows, everything. It's everywhere. So, I see a world that's in love with Black folks, in love with the hood, in love with the fact our struggle is. We had a government that preyed on us. And then you got some folks who we outlaws. You know what I'm saying? We're going to get it how we live it and do whatever. We're going to maintain our respect above the law, because the law never respected us and the law ain't never been fair. And even we didn't need no statistics for us to know that this law was that they was having a war against us.
Right. They didn't come out and say that's what it was. It wasn't until, 30,
we knew y'all wasn't
later.
Treating white folks like how you was treating us as children. So we didn't need to know that. We just maintained our respect.
I think one of the questions, I guess this is maybe me just being too technical, is the fact that I think this world loves everything that you've created, what you're about, what you can do, but despise you because they're not you and could never be you in that same situation. In terms of how you describe the ability to take what was pressed upon and orchestrated to destroy you, but then turn it around and make it look so appealing that the rest of the world wants to copy you.
To be
all the while not wanting to embrace the trauma that actually triggered the fact that, okay, I'm in this. I'm in this environment. I'm in this situation. I'm in this place where this type of indoctrination is diabolically opposed and against edifying me. How do I edify myself, or how do I find edification in this world where every time I turn around, everything about me is somehow rejected? And so you create, and that's what we're known for as a people. It doesn't matter where we are in the world. It doesn't matter what resources we have. We create. We are expressive, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful.
We create a place of our own definition and define it. And you in the gang wars, that's tribal. That's tribal. That's tribal. And you see countries at war. You see all types of people at war. You understand me? And you see a whole underworld that has to try to operate. You understand me? So I'm not, saying black on black violence is good, and you try to trivialize us that, but I see white folks as the kings on, ethnic group violence. They violent against other white folks, and they violent against, all other ethnic groups. You understand me?
Violent across the world.
Word. White folks are very discriminative. They were discriminative towards Jews, discriminative towards Irish, discriminative towards Italians. They looked at you. You wasn't blonde hair, blue eyes. So if it wasn't no black folks in America, they'd be discriminated against each other. You understand me? So,
and you see that in areas where, and that's where a lot of the conversation where poor white folks will come in and say, "Hey, that's how I was treated," you know.
so when you try to make black folks look like monsters, that's not fair. Every culture who got issues, we talking about how you put all on the TV like we these monsters.
And that's the only thing that we are, monsters and entertainers.
We got everything, just like y'all got everything. And y'all got it more because you got more money and more power. So what happens? That amplifies your problems even more. But you what? Control the media. So you say, oh, look, it's them. No, look at them.
Ooh, this has been a session. I think
Always is.
this has been more than Cannabis Equity Minutes. This has been a conversation on this industry, on what legalization means versus or says it should mean versus what is actually happening, and the whole entire the missed point of it. When
I can talk about this for hours. I can talk about it for hours because one, I'm not
exhaustive.
I'm not allowed to have a voice. So what do you on a platform, anything? Nobody like me is allowed to have a voice in this. And as I've been invited to the program, but then they sit around like, oh, I don't know who to talk to. There's no voices, and they introduce white men who've been arrested for cannabis as the voice of mass incarceration when they rode our backs into legalization. You understand me? It's not fair, and Black community is our turn to call them out on this. This happened to us, and I want to know if this apology is real.
I think we'll wrap it up on. No, I can't wrap it up yet because I want to say something.
Go ahead.
Provide some information, but I want to just highlight when you say give your voice, and there's an expectation that your voice needs to be some type of submissive, subservient, or fit into their box. And the minute you have that expectation, then you automatically have discredited the apology, because then you're expecting a certain type of reaction. Going back to is this really a genuine I'm sorry and a genuine desire to effectuate equity and to address those who have been harmed the most by the war on drugs. The minute you want to put a caveat in terms of how those who have been harmed by the war on drugs should respond to this movement, the expectation as to how they should carry themselves is if there was some form of blueprint for everything that happened, and you are missing that blueprint. You miss the point completely as to what legalization, particularly in this space of addressing those who've been harmed the most by the war on drugs, what that means. But what I wanted to wrap it up on, and I started to say, was that we will be back on Friday. And this Friday, with our Cannabis Equity Minutes, we'll be looking at some of the information that the Cannabis Control Commission has put out around the what are the licenses that have been secured for provisional. We have about I think I wrote it down. This coming meeting, it looks like we have about 19. I didn't write it down. Okay, so we have about 25, I think, folks that are going to be getting provisional licenses, which is the first leg in a leg process to becoming operational in Massachusetts. You get your provisional license, then this is what at the state level, you get your provisional license at the state level, you get what's called a final license, and we have 19 businesses that are up for their final license, and then you get what is called the authorization to begin operation. And so we are going to hear the update with the commission as to where they are in that group of provisional licenses. I know for a fact there are at least 2 that are EEs, or Economic Empowerment Certificate holders, that are securing their provisional or that are up for provisional licensure. There may be more. I'm not familiar. It doesn't tell you that in the outline that they give. But interestingly enough, there are almost 100 licensees that are up for renewal. And so it'll be interesting to hear what the commission has to say in terms of the renewal applications and what they said around their positive impact plans, how they're viewing them, if the commission is going to be any more transparent and forthright in terms of sharing with the public as to what are the metrics, what are the updated positive impact plans, because the commission has chosen 5 to highlight on their platform, and they've made it a little bit more difficult to find the initial provision positive impact plan proposals. It would be interesting to see the renewal what the positive impact plan report out was for these entities and what their plan is moving forward. Again, going back to this conversation on accountability. On that note, do you have anything else, a closing message for the community? Definitely appreciate the insight that you brought to that. And yes, I am slightly biased, but at the same time, the commitment really is, if you're going to talk about equity, and I'm here talking about equity, we're going to talk about real equity, not just the rhetoric, not just the feel good, and not just the things that fit into the existing boxes, which is such as the expungements. It's not enough. I didn't get to really
and that's
explore.
not where you start the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not where you start the conversation from. And then you tell the victims of it to shut up and be quiet and take this, and you don't even involve them. And
it's more than shut up and be quiet and take this. It's here, this is what you can do. Go get that and go get a job. We've done our part. We've restored you. When in fact, that's...
Oh, you guys want a handout. So we're not even going to talk about the totality of this war. And then you're going to call these things that happen to the Black and brown community a handout. And it's Black folks and brown folks with jobs or in these political positions who have been chosen to lead on this expungement stuff.
I think you could probably do your own talk just on that.
The egotism of it all, because I've spoken to these individuals, and in every state they want to tell you that it's their expungement plan. So if white folks allow them to call the expungement plan theirs, and if they're allowed to champion it, then they feel so amped because they're being elevated to a political position. And I had to tell her.
You said white folks or Black folks? Black folks.
White folks. Whose expungement plan is this? But that's what I'm trying to tell you. I spoke to Black folks, and they said that it was theirs. And I'm like, how is it your expungement plan and he's doing the same thing over here and there? The person didn't think that I knew and was familiar with the expungements happening everywhere. And I'm like, how is this your expungement plan and your idea when they're doing it over here and there? It's obviously some collective idea they're pushing for everybody, but they're trying to make it seem like it's new and it's exclusive. And then they're trying to make it seem like the people got to fight for it. That's reverse trick now. Oh, everybody got to fight for it. They're not just giving it to it. They don't want to give it to us. And that's how stupid people are. That's not where, first of all, that's not where we start the conversation, one. 2, stop acting like we got to fight the white man for expungements when he giving them the expungements. They're already starting to give him expungements. Stuff that he don't want to give, he ain't giving. You understand? He ain't giving. And for you to be at the helm of this and act like you are the one who invented expungements and brought this to the conversation is horrendous. And it's a travesty to start the conversation there when a conversation has never even been, initiated. You understand? Conversation has never been initiated, but I digress.
And we wrap up.
Yes.
Good evening. And thank you all for joining. Again, tune in on Friday. We will continue the conversation on equity and also the conversation on accountability. I think we're going to really just begin to drive home, because without any type of accountability, what I did see, interestingly enough, because, with the Cannabis Equity Minutes, since I've been doing this, I've started every meeting or every session talking about data, and how important data is. And again, calling for more transparency with the data, and data disaggregated in ways where we can look at, are we really meeting the target? And so I hear folks now coming with the data, which is great, right? But at the end of the day, we want to see outcomes, right? We don't want the conversation to just stop there, because the data gives information for us to then determine what actions we need to take to get at these outcomes. And so now we need to see actions actions that are going to effectuate equity. And so our cannabis equity minutes is going to shift lens a little bit and really ground itself in accountability and holding folks accountable for what it is that they are saying or saying that they are doing. Thank you.
Thank you. That's us.
Yep.